Well, don't look now, but BYU has stepped its game up in the transfer portal. The question is it enough to legitimately close the gap on Texas Tech atop the Big 12? Can we be talking about BYU as a potential Big 12 champion? I'm going to get into all of that today. This will be a pretty state of Utah heavy show because Kyle Whittingham got one over on BYU finally. It's about time, Kyle. And Utah continues to leak some water, though they did get very good news. And we will talk about one of the best quarterbacks in the Big 12 coming back. Plus, nationally, wild Ross Dellinger article about where college sports could be going. Still seems crazy up in the air, but it could mean that the Big 12 doesn't play Big 10 or SEC teams basically ever again. Loaded show tonight. Thank you for being here. It is the Open for Business Big 12 podcast where the Big 12 just means more. I am your host, John Kurtz. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter at ofbnews.com. Fong Wei, it is great to see you here. Everybody else, join Fong Wei in the chat tonight. You can submit a super chat by clicking the $ below the chat box. Appreciate everybody who was able to do that and support the channel that way, but totally free just to like and subscribe. And you can also get in touch on Venmo. It is John-Kurtz-4 to do that. If you want to leave me a question or comment there, I will kick off the next show with it. And that is where we start tonight with my guy, Jeffrey. Thank you, Jeffrey. Appreciate you, my friend. No question, but he just says, love your podcast, Vegas Blue Cougar. There we go, Jeffrey. Thank you. Thank you, good sir. Enjoy Vegas. And enjoy this show because there's going to be a lot of talk about your Cougars and what is happening in the transfer portal right now. Started quiet for BYU. It was all about retention. Now they're making some noise in the portal. What does that mean for this Big 12 race next year? Okay. BYU has added a new element to its game. No longer is this just a story of retention, which was an epic story of retention. BYU now has one of the nation's best portal classes. Does that mean they've legitimately closed the gap on Texas Tech? Can they legitimately challenge the Red Raiders for a Big 12 championship next year? I'm going to tell you in just a moment. Okay, so you guys know, if you've been here for a minute, about the retention work that BYU has done with its roster. It's been just incredible. That would stand even if Kyle Whittingham had not left for Michigan, but the fact that Kyle Whittingham did leave for Michigan, being a guy with all those connections in the state of Utah, the fact that he pulled Jay Hill and Gennaro Guilford, two defensive coaches, including the defensive coordinator from BYU, and the Cougars didn't lose a single key contributor off that defense. Now, I know Max Alford wound up leaving and going to Michigan, but he was not a starter, okay? BYU kept the starters. They kept the really, really key pieces of that defense. And even in a regular year where you're coming off of a second straight 11-plus win season, you won 23 games in 2 years, you are an ascendant program in college football, your roster's probably going to be poached a bit. Like, people would just naturally expect that. I think especially your Big 10 and SEC country folks would be like, well, this is a Big 12 school. I mean, of course, they're going to get poached. Nope, didn't happen. Not even with a coach to follow, which speaks to the culture at BYU. It speaks to the financial infrastructure at BYU. You guys know all that. Offensively, BYU kept the key players, starting with Bear Bachmeier, right? But LJ Martin, your Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year, he is back. Incredible running back. That lessens some of the load of having to go into the portal and try and find somebody else. You got those two back. A lot of camaraderie there. Parker Kingston is coming back. I mean, you're going to want to see the offensive line beefed up a bit. More on that in a moment. You're going to need to find a Chase Roberts replacement. May have found that in the transfer portal as well. But for the most part, BYU did an A++ job at retaining talent and setting up another Big 12 title game run this year. But now we can go beyond that. When I last talked to you, and if this sounds a bit redundant, you're like, well, John, we kind of just heard this, right? Yeah, you did, but that was about the retention piece of that. Now we're adding to that. With BYU has been very active in the last week in the transfer portal at adding to its roster. In fact, I look, Texas Tech has a great portal class. I'm not taking away from it at all. BYU's starting to nip at Texas Tech's heels. I'll tell you exactly where in just a moment. But if you are looking at this on 24/7 Sports, BYU has the number one linebacker in the transfer portal coming to Provo. And when you got to replace Jack Kelly, who is a tremendous, tremendous linebacker, that's a pretty good place to be. BYU just went to the first team all ACC squad and said, yep, we'll take that one. From Cal, Cade Uluave is the linebacker, top in the portal again, according to 24/7. He was first team all ACC this year. He had 97 tackles, 11 and a half TFLs, 3 sacks. That's a dude. That's an absolute dude that BYU just went and picked up. And hey, guess who one of the schools was that was pursuing there? Michigan. Michigan. Happened to stumble upon that when I was doing prep for the show tonight. A Michigan blog frustrated that they lost out on Uluave, but not just losing out on him, but losing out on him to a Big 12 school. You're going to pair him with Isaiah Glasker and Siali Acera. You've got yourself a linebacking core, my friends. It certainly seems like BYU's defense is going to be in a very, very good spot next year, right? But that's not it. That's not it. If we're thinking about the offense and making sure that you have offensive weapons, Carson Ryan is one of the pieces that you would be losing there at tight end. So why not just continue the Lyons family lineage, set up some incredible puns about Lions, Tiger, and Bear all being on the offense next year at BYU. Great marketing potential here. Walker Lyons, transfer from USC. The older brother of Ryder Lyons, 5-star quarterback who's going to be coming in a year to play for the Cougars. Now, I know that Walker Lyons' stat line from last year is not overly impressive. He had 20 catches at USC, a couple of touchdowns, but I think he's a guy with a lot of talent. And I think that's somebody that could be a really impactful piece next year at BYU. I think BYU will know how to use him, will be able to use him very, very effectively. And he's got the pedigree of being a really highly recruited player coming out of high school. So that part is good. Then we're going to talk offensive linemen here. That's the other portal piece of this that's been really poignant for BYU, is they've added 3 offensive linemen from Stanford, Washington, and Utah State. Now, I'm not going to break this down like I know a ton about offensive line play, but it seems like really nice depth to add to the offensive line and beef yourself up a little bit. Because if you are going to compete with Texas Tech, that becomes paramount. That is really, really key. You're going to have to do a good job of that. Okay, so how highly ranked is this class overall? First, I want to remind you, subscribe to the channel. Please like the video. Totally free to do that. This portal class varies wildly depending on where you're looking at it, but it's a top 15 class in the nation, according to On3. So Texas Tech, according to On3, still has the number 1 class in the nation. All right, number 14, still a ways behind. But there's so much variance. If you look at 24/7, it's like Tech is 11 and BYU is like in the 30s or 40s. At least by one metric, BYU is creeping up here. It seems to me one clear thing that has happened as we address the question, has BYU closed the gap on Texas Tech? I feel like they have a bit, because the talent, I think, has been upgraded with what BYU has done in the portal combined with retaining that roster. I think they've only become more talented if you're taking into account losses and gains on this roster right now. And that's not even factoring in guys getting another year in the system, guys being a year older, continuity, especially think about the ceiling for Bear Bachmeier this year. This is a guy who's going to be just making his second, it will be just his second year as a starter, right? So could be huge leaps next year for Bear Bachmeier. Texas Tech, I know, has added Brendan Sorsby, so they did get better at quarterback. I think significantly better at quarterback from last year, but who's going to be the better QB of the two? I think that's actually a really interesting question if we're talking about next season. Who is the better quarterback? Is it Brendan Sorsby or is it Bear Bachmeier? We'll see. I'm sure Texas Tech fans will be very convicted in their guy. I bet BYU fans will be pretty convinced that it is going to be their guy. I think the biggest question on how far is the gap actually closed is what is happening in the trenches. And that's no surprise. If you're talking about Texas Tech, last year it was all about the trenches. David Bailey, about as dominant as it gets. Romello Height, Lee Hunter. That was an elite elite defensive line. And what has Tech done once again this year? They've gone and attacked the portal in the trenches on the defensive line. Is there a David Bailey in that group, though? I'm not sure that you have somebody as dominant. Will you be able to just mass sub in a new defensive line and make it work? That, in fairness, is probably an area of the field where it's not as contingent on guys having played together and having the continuity of a unit like an offensive line. I think would be a bit different. Probably some more communication that is necessary and going on there. But I do wonder that about Texas Tech. Can you really just plug and play it again? But if they can, if it's anywhere near what it was last year, I don't know that we have evidence that BYU's offensive line has taken enough of a step to change things. Because that, I mean, we can talk all we want about a bunch of different things with those games and what happened to BYU. And they turned it over a bunch in the second half of the game in the Big 12 championship, for instance. But the key was just, it was as simple as this, guys. BYU could not run the football on that Texas Tech front. They could not run the football. 137 yards combined in 2 games. 2.3 yards per carry. That's it. 2.3 yards per carry in 2 games against Texas Tech. That has to improve. Like, full stop, period, end of sentence. BYU will have no chance to close the gap if they cannot run the ball better on Texas Tech. And run the ball consistently, obviously, throughout the year, but that wasn't much of a problem for BYU unless they're playing Texas Tech. If you're in a winner-take-all Big 12 championship game scenario, you want to get closer than 3 touchdowns, you better be able to run the ball, because that is why BYU turned it over so much at the end of that game. So that's the biggest question. But if you're making the case for BYU, which I would, that they have closed the gap at least a bit, it's that they'll have a bunch of continuity. I think Joey McGuire and James Blanchard do an excellent job, and they have a great culture there. I think those things are tangible and important, but it is still funneling a far greater quantity of new players in than what BYU is going to be doing. And we know those dudes at BYU can play. We know that they can play. Maybe not up to Tech's level from last year, but they can really play. They're going to get a year older, and you've got a dynamic quarterback that's no longer a true freshman. I like all of that. I think BYU has added some significant talent in the transfer portal, particularly like linebacker talent-wise. I think you literally could not have done better in the transfer portal than what BYU actually did there. So can their camaraderie and continuity on the roster, getting Bear Bachmeier better at quarterback, upgrading talent at a couple of positions with a really good portal class, can that overtake some of the advantage that Texas Tech had? I would tell you the answer is yes. I would still pick Texas Tech to be the favorite. I would still pick them to win the Big 12 right now. But I think that gap has shrunk some with what we've seen BYU do. If you think I'm wrong, let me know. Tell me in the comments. And hey, if you're watching this as a standalone clip on YouTube and you want to learn how BYU's culture passed the ultimate test this offseason, click this video you see right now. If you are watching live, don't worry about it. Please do, though, if you're watching live, subscribe to the channel. Subscribe to the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter. It's ofbnews.com to do that. We're getting close to 6,000 subscribers, people, and I appreciate each and every one of you. But it's totally free, comes to your inbox twice a week. Like the video as well. That is also completely free. And if you want to submit a super chat, just click the $ below the chat box in order to do that. I do have, in just a few minutes, big picture story about college athletics that I want to make sure I get into on the live stream tonight. It's a mess. NCAA convention going on right now. Ross Dellinger is there, boots on the ground, with a crazy report about where the sport might be going. But before that, we do have to get into a little Kyle Whittingham and BYU. All right. Kyle Whittingham finally got BYU back on something. All right. Let's be honest here. BYU's been getting the better of Kyle Whittingham for a while now. On the field, off the field. And I say that even realizing that Whittingham did poach a couple of coaches, including the defensive coordinator at BYU. But if we're looking at the full scope of the scoreboard, that seems like like some garbage time points to maybe cover the spread for Whittingham. But BYU's won the last 3 games that they played against Kyle Whittingham. Each of the last 2 were particularly painful for Whittingham, one of which came on his home field. And BYU has just had more success in general. Like at a time when Whittingham was trying to wrap up his career at Utah as a total legend and get things figured out. It seems like at least a part of the motivation to come back this past year was like, hey, yes, obviously get the program back in a better place. But a part of that is take what I'm sure he viewed as the rightful place on top of the Holy War rivalry and beat BYU. But it did not happen. BYU won 12 games. They went to the Big 12 championship game. Utah did not in either of its 2 seasons of the Big 12. And then after Whittingham did pluck a couple of coaches, BYU kept everybody away. They kept all the players on the roster outside of Max Alford, who was moderate to minor contributor on the defense. All the starters stayed. Where did Kyle Whittingham get BYU then, you say, John? Well, one of the players that was in the portal, there was a really interesting story, especially when you saw Parker Kingston tweet some eyeballs out there at the transfer announcement. That was Smith Snowden. Okay, Smith Snowden, defensive back, I guess, / receiver. He played some both ways this past year for the Utes. But Smith Snowden, great player, second team All-Big 12 performer at corner. One of a handful of key Utah defenders to go into the portal this cycle. John Henry Daly there. They had a defensive tackle who came on at the end of the year, also there, that are both headed to Michigan. And BYU got a visit here, all right? Parker Kingston, maybe the eyeballs were just about getting a visit. That did happen. He's not going to BYU, though. BYU got a visit. So did Oregon. So did Michigan. I believe Notre Dame was the other in the mix there for Smith Snowden. And finally, Kyle Whittingham gets a dub over BYU. Smith Snowden is not going to transfer in state. He is headed to the Michigan Wolverines. So congrats to Kyle Whittingham on that. The trend lately has been that BYU has just gotten the best again of Whittingham in the portal. That did not happen right now, but that begs the question, is BYU actually the real loser here? Who is the real loser in all of this? Smith Snowden sweepstakes, Kyle Whittingham v. BYU. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, totally free. Appreciate you guys doing that. I would say it's clearly Utah. Unfortunately for Ute fans here, it is Utah who is the real loser in all of this, because Smith Snowden to BYU would have been a luxury item. Now, a very nice luxury item, and I'm talking about trying to stack all the elite talent that you can to go up against Texas Tech and close that gap. That's what you got to be thinking about right now if you're BYU. This was still a luxury item. BYU's, they've got things in pretty good order there. Had you lost Evan Johnson, maybe this would have been more important. But Evan Johnson's coming back. He's part of that big core on defense that is coming back. Utah, meanwhile, loses a guy who's been a multi-year starter, returning second-team All-Big 12 player. I think some on the Utah side might push back and say, hey, for what he was asking financially, not totally sure if he was worth it. I have at least heard that from some on the Utah side. I don't know what specifically he was asking for. I don't know the ins and outs of that. But again, I know it's a guy who definitely has some real name value. And he is a second-team All-Big 12 performer who has been a 2-year starter. I think in an ideal world, you certainly wouldn't have wanted to lose him, and certainly wouldn't have wanted to lose him to Kyle Whittingham in the transfer portal. And Whittingham just continues to be brutal to Utah, man. I mean, any thought that Kyle Whittingham was going to take it easy on Utah here is just not the case. You had 6 position coaches or coordinators going with him off of the Utah staff. You had the strength and conditioning, he pulls the strength and conditioning guy as well. Now we're talking about 4 really key players, again, at least in name, right? And then I haven't even gotten to, I should have teased that out earlier. I haven't even gotten to the biggest part here, where Whittingham is taking now Utah's best 2026 recruit. Salisi Moa. My apologies if I'm botching that name. I probably am. But 4-star prospect. He's announcing tomorrow at an all-star game what people anticipate to be a flip to Michigan. Oh, boy. This is the one that I feel like I've seen the most angry Utah reaction to. All right, man, You're going to take John Henry Daly, who was an elite pass rusher this year, but he has an injury that may keep him sidelined for a good chunk of the season next year. Okay, fine. Overpay to go take him and get him for part of the season, see how that goes. You want to take Smith Snowden and what his asking price was, all right, kind of hurts. You want to take J.J. Buchanan? That's the other one that I really felt like people thought hurt. Total stud freshman, 427 yards, 5 touchdowns. But, okay, taking J.J. Buchanan. You're going to take a starting defensive tackle, Jonah Leaha. All right, fine. But now you're even gutting the top recruit that we had in this class, the number 1 player in the state of Utah. You're going to take this kid too. Now, this is a kid who was he took a visit to Michigan when Sharon Moore was still the coach there. So there are some pretty obvious ties with what's going on there. But this was a huge recruiting coup, a big recruiting win for Utah when they got him to flip from Tennessee in December. That was early December that happened. That was a huge deal. This is an elite recruit. And now it's just damn, when does it stop? Whittingham didn't stop at the staff. He didn't stop at just offensive staff. It's defensive staff. He didn't stop at just Jason Beck. It was tenured guys that had been there a long time. He didn't stop at minor contributors. He went into full-on playmakers, old guys, young guys, whatever it might be. And now it's young guys. Not even there on campus yet. Big recruiting wins that you had the 2026 recruiting class. So, Kyle Whittingham did finally get a W over BYU, which has been a minute since he's had one of those. Utah does take an L. It's not all bad. All right. Devin Dampier is coming back. Bird Ficklin is coming back. And if you do go look, in fairness to Utah, if you go look at the transfer portal classes right now on 3, they're right next to each other. Ironically, Utah and Michigan are literally right next to each other in transfer portal class rankings. And in fact, as of a couple hours ago when I looked, Utah was 1 spot ahead of Michigan. So I'm not saying that this is all total panic time, but Whittingham has definitely done some real damage here. As the dust has settled, Whittingham's gotten a couple on BYU. They've gotten more certainly on him. Utah has taken some real damage. That ship has taken on some water because of Whittingham going. And if you want to, as I've seen some Utah fans do, you want to trace it really all the way back, it's due to Sharon Moore's infidelities, basically. That is why this has all happened. Just insane timing, the way that it went down. But Utah did not win this war with Kyle Whittingham. Well, if you are watching this as a clip, click this video to learn more about what Whittingham stealing from Utah has done to his legacy there. If you're watching live, just ignore it. We roll on here on the show. I appreciate all of you being here greatly. Please subscribe to the channel, like the video. All of that is very, very helpful. If you want to submit a super chat, click the $sign below the chat box. Thank you to everybody who does that. We do have a couple of super chats to get through right now. Let's talk to Erwin Baccarin. Erwin Baccarin. Great work. Thank you, by the way, for your support. Great work. Does the transfer portal remove the impact of conference hierarchy and convert to the consistently top teams just being the biggest spenders for the most part, since they're able to replace their exit talent immediately? Yes, I think to an extent. I think some of this still does remain to be seen a bit. I think what we found out last year is that Texas Tech now has a blueprint that it definitely can work like that. You just go outspend. But once again, I do want to be careful. And Tech fans, I always defend you guys on this, and I think it's totally true. Tech does have a great culture. Tech does have a great GM. There was a lot more to it than just throwing a ton of money at the roster to make it all fit and make it work the way that they did. But they now have a blueprint that if you want to go devote as many, as much as you can resource-wise to throw the transfer portal, you can make it work to the tune of a conference championship and be a team that makes the playoff. I think Miami is a good example of this too. Miami has just executed in the portal big time. They've crushed it. They're always up there with the most talented rosters. They have finally made it work. They almost did last year. They definitely have now. They're going to play for a national championship. Ole Miss has been a team and a program that's executed really well in the transfer portal era. But you could also say that isn't totally true because nobody was saying Indiana had like a top 5 transfer portal class last year. And look at the Hoosiers just blasting everybody on their way to a national championship and potentially undefeated season. Like one of the greatest stories in sports history. Forget college football, sports history. And that was not a team. That was a team more just like identified well, had adequate resources, identified well, and put pieces together really well within their program and were insanely well coached. So that's my only hesitation on it, where it's like, I don't know that it will be across the board. That's always how it's going to work. But Texas Tech has shown that there's a blueprint for it. Miami has shown there's a blueprint for it. Ole Miss, and even some of your traditional powers, Georgia, Alabama, LSU, they haven't mastered this whole thing, even with the vast money and resources and just prestige and draw that they have. They haven't mastered it either. So I think it's more like it gives you more of an opportunity if you are like, certainly teams that have that money will have a better opportunity to reload year to year. Yes, as a generality, but specifics year in, year out can still change a lot. And there are lots of other variables. I think this is still, one, such a fluid, ever-changing environment, and two, such a new environment for everybody to get used to and try and deal with, that it's hard to make like definitive statements that this is how it will be year after year. I mean, what do we think it's going to look like 3 years from now? Do we think it'll be the same as it is right now, like the same rules, parameters? This is all going to tie in really well to what I'm about to talk about next. But do we think it will all look the same 3 years from now, 5 years from now? Probably not. So it's just hard to make definitive statements. And that's not me trying to like dodge your question. I just think it's the total reality of where we're at right now. How much have things changed in the last 3 years? 3 years ago, Georgia won the national championship game. What was it? 65-7 over TCU. And that was like a historically good Georgia team with a totally fat and loaded roster all over the place. They don't have that anymore. Georgia's not doing that anymore. That's really been curbed the last 3 years. So things can change pretty dramatically here. But it's a good question, Erwin. It's a good question, and I appreciate you, my friend. Bracket Cat, Utah versus Michigan in the college football playoff. Toxicity off the charts. That'd be awesome. I saw it was somebody who had, I think it was a 2014 playoff. They made a bracket if it were going to be a 2014 playoff this year. And it actually had a first round game between Utah and Michigan. I thought, man, you put that together, that would be about as fun a matchup as I think like Big 12 fans could have to watch play out. And just college football. That'd be great for college football to have that be something that you would get to see. Morgan Scalley shaking hands with Kyle Whittingham at midfield for that game. Like, dude, are you kidding me? Especially if, what if that's like a first round game? Say that's like an 8-9 game in Salt Lake City at Rice Eccles. Give me that. Give me that. Would love to watch that. Would absolutely love to watch that. So yes, Bracket Cat, that would be awesome. There would be some toxicity. I think ultimately, and I've got another video coming on this because I recruited an expert to talk with me more about this, but I think this is not going to be some total legacy altering thing for Kyle Whittingham in the end. I don't think it's like, I still think there should and will be a statue someday of Whittingham at Rice Eccles. Like, time heals all wounds. If Morgan Scalley is legitimately a very good coach, like Utah fans certainly are expecting, that'll help too, as long as Utah just keeps winning, right? I mean, I think if Utah continues to struggle, then maybe there will be more long-term animosity here. But I think time heals all wounds. And you got to look back and say, I mean, look, the guy gave you 2+ decades of Hall of Fame level coaching. He pulled you from the G5 to the top of a Power 4 conference. And now you look back at it and say, hey, the door is basically shut on any G5 teams coming through. So if we didn't have that and we didn't make that move now, or when we did, we'd be stuck. We'd be screwed. And now we may be in position to just be at the top level of college sports for eternity because of the way Whittingham has set us up. So legacy should still very well be intact, even though I understand the frustration. I'd be really mad at him too right now. I get it. It's a very nuanced situation all the way around, which you guys know, that's one of my favorite things. I don't like being just total crazy hot take guy. There's always room for a lot of nuance, and that story more than almost any that I've heard recently. Thank you, Bracket Cat. I appreciate you being here. Okay. Well, the Big 12 could be shut out of ever playing the SEC or the Big Ten again. That's according to the latest from Ross Dellinger, unless Michigan just saved the day for the Big 12. Speaking of the Wolverines, did Michigan just save the day for the Big 12 when that could be where things are headed? You get locked out from playing the Big 10 or the SEC. Ross Dellinger gave us an all-encompassing article. Ross Dellinger from Yahoo Sports, best newsbreaker in the college game right now. The NCAA convention is going on. And so Ross Dellinger was on the scene. He's got boots on the ground. He's got lots of quotes from anonymous administrators, from Greg Sankey, from everybody across the college sports world. The NCAA convention, you can only imagine how many things they have to talk about right now with all of the issues plaguing college sports and the college football landscape specifically. It is a very interesting, weird time where viewership and interest has never been higher. Story this week about ESPN feels like they should be using people like Josh Pate more because they have felt like they have not programmed enough to how big and vast and intense the college football audience is right now. So interest has never been greater, but the sport's also never been messier. You've never had more people frustrated, coaches, administrators, whoever. Weird time. But this is a meeting of all the coaches and administrators. And what they're talking about is crazy. They're starting to talk about, and I will read you some of this, they're starting to talk about a world where conferences only play each other. It's only conference games, and you have different rules in each conference. That is not something I had considered until reading this article today. Here's what Ross Dellinger says. Unbeknownst to many, college leaders have created a new committee with the mission to study the future of FBS governance and determine if the subdivision should operate outside of the NCAA structure. Okay, that's not new. It's been talked about for a while. Like, should your Power Four conferences, even we talked about like Power Four autonomy and should they just break off and do their own thing? Maybe now it becomes Power Two. That's people start to go down that road. But Dellinger says something even more serious is brewing, a frustration from those in many power leagues at the lack of enforcement from the NCAA and College Sports Commission over allegations of tampering, eligibility rulings, and circumvention of the cap. Yeah, I mean, I just, again, would tell anybody, are you surprised at all that we're sitting here after this year saying everybody's frustrated by how cap circumvention is happening? I mean, of course. It's college sports. They're going to break the rules. They will figure out a way to break the rules. And especially this just seems so ill-fated that the College Sports Commission would actually have legitimate authority and or just the stones to try and enforce that. Now, we'll see. There have been some threats made in recent days from the College Sports Commission that they'll come down on some NIL deals and some schools, and it could ruin the eligibility of certain players. I'll believe it when I see it if they actually have the stones to do that. But Dellinger says the solution for some is emerging as each conference should govern itself, enforce its own rules, and perhaps even compete only with its own members. The idea here generally is that some of these admins are saying it's impossible to govern this whole group of FBS schools under the same rules. It's impossible for any of these entities, College Sports Commission, NCAA, to enforce tampering, to enforce circumventing the cap. And if we can't do that, and we're not going to get congressional help, we're not going to get something that allows us to actually have some real power in this scenario to rule on things like that, then we're going to have to just go to everybody in their own silo, everybody within their own conference. Much easier to make rules and put people under those jurisdictions. So you want to crack down on tampering, you want to crack down on circumventing the cap, you can do it within your own conference there instead of having to worry about just everybody in a total free-for-all. Okay, here's a quote from Georgia President Jerry Moorhead. If the CSC is not going to enforce the House settlement, if the NCAA is not going to enforce the tampering rules, and if Congress isn't going to pass the SCORE Act, then it leaves the SEC in a position that we have to go our own way to create some rules and a level of responsibility. Now, Greg Sankey did caution any suggestion of an SEC breakaway. Nobody wants to rush there, and the SEC remains committed to a national organization, he said, but there are limits to that. The frustration level is building. I anticipate that there's a lot of people saying this might not work for us. Okay, so Sankey is saying, like, we're not going to totally break away. We're not going to do the Power 4 breakaway or the SEC Big Ten breakaway right now, but we are frustrated and there are some limits here. So it's kind of he's hedging. I mean, that's him hedging. We're not going to break away, but like maybe we'll break away. This all seems crazy, man, that we could be headed toward silo country unless Michigan saves everybody, including the Big 12, from getting locked out of playing the Big 10 of the SEC. More on that in just a moment. And please do subscribe to the channel. Like the video. Really helps me. Totally free. Appreciate you guys. But here's another quote from Big 10 athletic director. It says, quote, there is support among other memberships for a similar model. Each league governs itself and plays only games within the league. So there you go. Big 10 athletic director says there's support for a model where teams only play games within their own league. That really would be a bummer if that's the way that it has to go. But apparently that is something legitimately being discussed. Now, there are a world of problems with this. I mean, one, I can hear you saying, well, what do you do for a national champion then? That's a good question. There was a quote on that at some point here from somebody in the story being like, how would we crown a national champion? Because theoretically you can have conferences playing by different rules. If the Big Ten is going to be more lax with its rules on circumventing the cap, then they could go out and spend more money and get better players than the SEC or vice versa. Maybe it becomes a race to the bottom then. I don't know. But that becomes tough. How do you, if not everybody is playing by the same rules, how do you then throw them in a playoff and say that it's like a fair determination of a national champion? Do we then just go back to the old days of like the AP picks a national champion and the coaches poll picks a national champion? I don't know. But that almost feels like something that you might have to do if that's the way that you went here. And then, yeah, it would just be a total bummer to not have cross-conference, non-conference games. And if you're the Big 12, you're sitting there like, man, you guys already don't give us much of a chance, and now you're going to take away any opportunity for us to play you in an actual non-conference game. Yeah, sure, maybe we could play you in a bowl game or, yes, the playoff, but if it's a bowl game, you're going to say that it doesn't matter, and then you're going to say we're totally locking everyone else out from playing us in conference game. Like, that would be tough. That's tough if you're the Big 12 or the ACC, if you're not in a position of power in one of those leagues. And frankly, if I were the SEC, I'd be a little frustrated by that too. Like, hey, the Big Ten, if the Big Ten is just going to play all conference games again, you got like 3 or 4 great teams at the top, but they're going to be adding more games against some of the slop at the bottom. Whereas the SEC is a more balanced league. If you add, the SEC has been dragging its feet on going to 9 games. Now you're going to tell the SEC they've got to play 12 conference games. As they tell you, toughest league in the country, it's a different kind of grind. They've got to do 12 all of a sudden now. So I think there are a lot of potential problems here with this. But could Michigan save the Big 12 from a fate where they are resigned to only playing themselves? Perhaps, because Michigan hired a new university president. His name is Kent Syverud, okay, or Syveroid, Kent Syveroid from Syracuse. That is important because I didn't recognize his name, but what I do recognize him from is that he was a part of College Sports Tomorrow. You guys all know how much I loved to talk about these super leagues, all right? College Sports Tomorrow was pushing one of the super leagues that was modeled after European soccer with promotion and relegation. So you would take all approximately 130 FBS schools. 70 of them would automatically be in the upper division. The rest would be competing to get promoted into the upper division. And then the worst of the upper division could get relegated. That sounds awesome. I know the TV contracts was the big thing. It reportedly didn't gain a lot of traction. TV contracts were a huge issue there as to how exactly you would do this. But this was one of those leagues where there was talk of infusing private equity money into it. You'd pool the TV rights, right? One of the things Cody Campbell has talked about to make more money. So is Syveroid is he going to continue to push for this at Michigan? Do his priorities change if he's now at one of the big boys instead of Syracuse, where you're, a middle of the pack-ish ACC school? Middle of the pack-ish ACC school, your perspective on what's going on for the future of college athletics is wildly different than it is if you are at Michigan. And this is important. Like, before you roll your eyes or kind of laugh this off, remember how much power, how big of a stick Michigan's swinging here, man. Michigan killed, along with USC, but Michigan had a big enough voice in the room to effectively kill the private capital deal that the Big Ten had going. Big Ten was about to have that with the California pension plan, and Michigan's resistance put up enough of a wall that effectively killed it. I mean, it sounds like that's just not going to happen. The Big Ten Enterprises deal. So you've got a president now that is going to be heading a school with a ton of say, a ton of influence, and the Big Ten and the SEC are at odds right now because the Big Ten has been making a ton of big decisions or trying to. Now you've got this president who clearly is interested in college sports, and some of the reporting on this, Austin Meek, for instance, from The Athletic, had reported that was one of the reasons he got the gig as university president, was that he cares so much about college sports. He's really invested in this. So what's it going to be, man? Are you going to keep that same energy for something that would be better for the overall health of the sport long term? Or do you turn in now to, well, I'll change. Let's just add a few teams to the Big Ten, add a few teams to the SEC, and go roll with that? I don't know, but I think it will be wildly fascinating to follow and see what is going to happen there. Yeah, I don't know. I have no prediction on whether or not that's actually good for the Big 12. If you're thinking about this from a Big 12 perspective, if it's good for the Big 12, if it's bad, honestly, don't know. But I do know that it should be on your radar. That's the bottom line here. It should be on your radar, whether or not you actually think it will be good or not in the long term. Okay. Please do like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thank you all for being here. Make sure you're signed up for the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter. We are getting close to 6,000 subscribers to the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter. Thank you to everybody who subscribed this week. It's been a great week for that. OFBnews.com to do so, OFBnews.com, or click the link in the description of this video. It's very, very easy to get signed up. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel as well. And hit me up on Venmo at John-Kurtz-4 if you want to attach a question or comment there. If you're not watching live, you can do so, and I will get to you to kick off the top of the next show. I've got one last thing for you here. One of the biggest moves of the Big 12 offseason did just happen this week, and it's at a school that has taken some tough shots throughout the offseason. It has lost some key players in the portal. It lost a bevy of coaches. It went through a coaching change. And yes, I'm talking about the Utah Utes. Discussed them ad nauseum earlier in the show. Kyle Whittingham has not been kind. He's taken 6 coaches. He's taken 4 players, a couple of the biggest names off that squad last year. He's about to take the number 1 recruit in the 2026 recruiting class as well. Smith Snowden was the latest player from the portal to go to Michigan. I understand how, if you're a Utah fan, or even if you're just an outsider looking at this, say, man, it's been a bad offseason at Utah. First of all, I think Utah fans would say, look, the Morgan Scalley era being here is a good thing. I think Utah fans would tell you he's a coach more cut out for the current game, the modern game. I think many would probably tell you, like, higher ceiling at Utah. And, hey, they were just making a move that they had to make, or else Scalley was going to go take a job somewhere else. You weather the storm and spot the ball. Let's go play. Let's see how it rolls here. I'm probably somewhere in between, but I got to be honest. I'm very impressed by what they have done at quarterback, what Utah has done at quarterback, because it started with Bird Ficklin, who was a backup, and this is really the impressive part of this. He's the backup quarterback to Devin Dampier last year, flashed some wild talent. I mean, that kid is electric with the ball in his hands. And in the transfer portal era, when you do that, how often are you going to come back if the likelihood is you'll be behind somebody else again? Like, I would have told you going into the offseason, I certainly wouldn't have predicted Kyle Whittingham taking the Michigan job and taking as many players and staffers as he did. But I would have also said I would not predict that Utah would get both Bird Ficklin and Devin Dampier back. Well, Bird Ficklin had already announced he's coming back. And now in this transfer portal era, they're getting Devin Dampier back also, man. I got to give credit to Dampier. I'm going to play you his announcement video because I love this. As a Wolf of Wall Street connoisseur, where that is arguably my favorite movie of all time, Devin Dampier was a man after my own heart with his announcement video to come back. So let's play this real quick.
It's like both quarterbacks are coming back, and that's huge moving forward.
Devin Dampier on a couple of occasions has alluded to the fact that he is. We just haven't seen anything completely official.
I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving. The show goes on. This is my home.
Dampier needs to keep. Love that. Love that. Thank you, Devin Dampier, for giving the Wolf of Wall Street some love there. But man, I did not have that on my bingo card. One of my favorite sayings. That's impressive by Utah to do. That takes some money. That takes some financial commitment. And that takes some culture and a coach that people really like. I mean, think about this, too. It's not just that they got Bird Ficklin to stay when Dampier was going to stay, but they got Dampier to stay when his offensive coordinator went to Michigan. Like Dampier, it's not just his OC at Utah. That was his OC at New Mexico before. That's a guy I'm sure he's very comfortable with. He's built his career, which has been a very valuable and lucrative one so far in college sports, on being linked up with Jason Beck, playing in his offense. Now, I know that that's a part of why Utah made the hire that they did, that the offensive system is not that dissimilar from Beck's, and I'm sure it was done in mind with like, hey, let's try and make sure that we keep Devin Dampier around. And by the way, I'm not insinuating that like Dampier would have gone to Michigan when Bryce Underwood was coming back, but like if his offensive coordinator left and Bird Ficklin is coming back, then maybe it's like, well, let's go find a new home. But he did not. He did not. And Pacific Northwest Ute, I ain't Ficklin leaving. That's right. That is right. Thank you, Pacific Northwest Ute. I think you're the most clever listener that we have here on the show. If you want to try and beat him, do in the comments. Let me know. But Pacific Northwest Ute is leading that contest so far by a landslide. This is big. You need some key building blocks to build around that offense. Dampier combined with Ficklin really transformed the offense. They became second best rushing offense in the country last year. It was excellent, and it turned around the team. Having stability at quarterback turned around the team. Utah fans know all about what happens when you're not stable at the quarterback position. We saw with Cam Rising for 2 years and injuries and using Isaac Wilson and just a carousel of quarterbacks that weren't working out. That will drag down even the most steady, rock solid, and consistent of programs with great defenses. It will bring you down. So it is a huge deal to get both of those guys back. I'm interested to see how they use Ficklin. This also gives you injury protection if Dampier is going to be hurt, which he spent some time beat up last year. He's a tough SOB. He played through a ton of it, but he definitely did have some injury issues at times. He had some nicks and bruises. So big news in the Big 12. I wanted to give Utah some love on the back end here because so much of this has been about the consternation and frustration over what's going on with Whittingham and what's the Whittingham legacy and all of that. But I've got a video coming up. Hopefully will be out tomorrow. If not, sometime this weekend. Just depends on when I get around to put the finishing touches on the editing of it. But I talked to Alex Markham, who's covered Utah for a while, does UteNation.com. Great dude, gave some great insight on everything that's happened at Utah. So you get more context on somebody who's closer to it than me on the channel coming up pretty soon here. Okay, if you guys have others, I mean, Carson Cunningham's been great on Oklahoma State. If you have others you'd like me to chat with, let me know in the comments or hit me up on Twitter at JL Kurtz. Always open to some suggestions on that. You guys seem to be responding well to hearing from other people across the league. So with that, I think we're going to call it a show here, guys. I appreciate, guys and gals, I appreciate everybody for hanging out tonight. Remember to subscribe to the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter at ofbnews.com. ofbnews.com. We're making the push for 6,000 subs. Thank you to everybody who's doing that. subscribe to this channel. We're making the push for 30,000 subs. Shout out to everybody for doing that. I appreciate it a ton. I've been feeling all the love and support from you guys lately, so thank you. Thank you very much. I hope that you enjoy the rest of your week. I will be back on Sunday. And take care, everybody. I will talk to you soon.